many picture frames that were on the wall. And I will tell you something, if every 15-year-old had that job, we would reduce the smoking in this country by about 50%. You would not believe what would come off of those photos once every week doing that. I opened a little car wash, a mobile car wash business the year after when I was 16 years old, which is probably the business I'll have to return to if this doesn't work out. I did another number of other odd jobs. I went to school out at Brown University in Providence, came back to Minnesota afterwards because I love it here. 5 generations of my family preceded me, and it's the place that I call home. I wanted to work in our family business. My father said, no, you got to go make your mistakes elsewhere, so I did so. Made plenty of them. Had a little startup business. Finally joined the family business when I was a young guy. My first job was in the warehouse, filling orders, then in the production department, right out of Laverne and Shirley. If any of you had a strange tasting batch of Phillips peppermint schnapps in the spring of 1993, I do apologize. And I pursued my MBA on the weekend, worked my way up the ladder, and eventually managed the business. And at our family business, we are taught that business is a means to an end. And the end is not making as much money as we possibly can, rather taking as great care of our employees as we can and enriching the communities in which we do business. And that's what we did at Phillips, one of the first companies in the country to establish an employee profit sharing plan in the 1940s. When we sold the business, we acquired Talenti Gelato, which we built up into a wonderful brand and sold it to Unilever, sharing a lot of the success with our employees. And now I open 2 coffee shops, Pennies. Any Pennies fans in the room? Yay! Hey, well, I know 6 times a day. You're a third of our business. And I'm proud to put my principles in play at Pennies. That's alliteration. We pay $15 an hour minimum wage. And not because we have to, and not because it's easy, because it's not. But those are the principles that I believe create success by taking great care of people and in turn building wonderful businesses. So turning up the clock, November of 16, like all of you, I watched that election. And frankly, I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, anything else in this room. I'm grateful you're here. But when I watched that election that night, I did so with my family, including my teenage daughters, and I watched it through their lens. The campaign itself was atrocious, I think it's all fair to say. And the surprise and shock that night was palpable and disconcerting. And I woke up the next morning and sat at the breakfast table with my 2 daughters, and I promised them I would do something. With the blessings that I've been afforded to live in this country in this day and age, and to not stand up in times like these would have been a disservice to myself, my family, and my country. I didn't know what I would do, but I knew I would do something. And I turned my attention to Eric Paulson, who I believe presented himself as a thoughtful moderate when he first ran for office in this district. And I think he's changed quite considerably. And I say to many, I believe our Constitution anticipated a president like Donald Trump. But I do not believe our Constitution anticipated a Congress filled with so many who lack courage, present company excluded. And I mean that sincerely. This is a time when you stand up, and this is a time when you speak truth to power. It doesn't matter what your party is. Principle comes first. And I believe that the misrepresentation of this district begged for a new way forward, and I wish to provide that. So I drive my little truck. I declared my candidacy. In fact, I went to Washington thinking I would do this. One of the first visits I had was in Representative Hoyer's office, and I closed by saying, well, I'm going to give it some thought and I'll let you know. And he said, no, you made your decision already. Here I am. I made my decision already. So I bought this little truck that's parked outside. It's my government repair truck, a 1960 International Harvester Metro van. Why 1960? Last year a Democrat served in this seat. I promised, and Kennedy, I promised that little truck that it would see a Democrat serve in this seat. But I do so because there's such polarization, yet there's a great appetite to converse. And I drive this little truck around. It doesn't say I'm a Democrat or anything else for that matter. I serve coffee or lemonade, more coffee right now, and I invite people to come talk. And it is literally a vehicle to get people to have dialogue again and come speak and be heard. There's an appetite simply to be heard. And it's a responsibility of representation to listen. And that's exactly what I'm doing, and I'm having the time of my life doing it. So I'm combining my principles with what I hear. I believe it is time for this country to make the moral choice to afford health care to everybody who needs it, regardless of your age, your income, your geography, or your condition. I believe that we shouldn't have just good public schools in this country. We should have world-class public schools, and not just for some kids, but for every kid in this country. I believe we should address climate change head-on. And we did not leave the Stone Age because we ran out of rocks. We left the Stone Age because we came up with better ideas, and we have them. We need to invest in them, and we can. I believe it's time to pass the Equal Rights Amendment in honor of all the women in this room and in this country. Women's health and economic security are darn important to me and are elevated. Gun violence prevention. I ask everyone in this room, when someone wants to talk to you about gun control, change the conversation, if you want to have a conversation, to gun violence prevention. If you want to end one, use the word control. And we can do that, and I'd love to talk to you about that as well. There's so much more. But I ask you, no matter what your number one issue is, I hope your number two is campaign finance reform. Because I can tell you, as someone who has supported candidates for the better part of my adult life, most of them terrible returns on investment, I knew there was a problem. But I'll tell you, only when I became a candidate myself and am subject to this industry have I discovered how corrupting, how disenfranchising, and how terribly threatening it is to our democracy. And I will somehow, some way, someday affect some change, whether it's as a member of Congress or from the outside, because I believe it is why Donald Trump is president. The system disenfranchises people because it requires us to spend all of our time, a lot too much time, raising money. And who do you raise it from? Not in $5 increments. You raise it from multi-$1,000 increments. And as a result, we don't spend enough time with the people who really matter, who feel unheard. And that's why they send people like Donald Trump to the White House. We can do better. We will do better. I would love to be part of that change. And should I be so fortunate to do so, I would love to do it with you. I'd like to introduce Steny Hoyer, whose name you probably know, one of the most revered members of Congress, serving his 19th term. 19th term, which means he first was elected when he was 9 years old.
You're right.
Has served in just
I like
about every...
his rap, though. I'm with that.
Has served in a number of the most important leadership positions, including majority leader, and now serves as the Democratic whip. We are honored by your presence and by your service, and boy, do I look forward to effective change with you.
I don't need to say anything. I don't think. This is one of the best in the country.
Yes.
What you just heard is why I'm running for Congress. You know, we have so many candidates that aren't sure. They want to be a congressman, they want to do this, that, and the other, but they're not sure exactly why they're running. Dean knows exactly why he's running and why he is therefore one of the best candidates we have in America, and why we believe he's going to win this race, and why I hope that he said he wanted you to leave here with hope. I want you to leave here with hope and a conviction that your hard work can turn hope into reality. I want you to feel a personal responsibility for making a difference in a country that in many ways has lost its way.
Yeah. Yay.
Whose values are at risk. And the only way, frankly, in a democracy that we can, if we are not pleased with what's going on, change it, is to put people in office who will speak up, act up, and make a difference. Dean has just told you that's exactly what he intends to do. Sharon, thank you for inviting us all to your home. I thought I was in Alaska or something. Mounds of snow. I thought this was clearly an April 1st joke. But what a wonderful, wonderful view, and what a wonderful place you have here. Sharon and I have something in common. My former appropriations staffer was Obama's ambassador to Australia. And of course, Sharon was an Australian diplomat. And she doesn't know John Barry, but we had a good conversation. And Sharon, it's so important for people to invite others into their home. Now, many of you may have known Dean before, but you're going to get an experience just now you have that most voters won't get. Most voters will have a very short window. But you've got an opportunity to make your own judgment. Is this somebody whose character and vision squares with what I think ought to be our representatives in Congress? And if you think it is, then each one of us, I said this morning, I was with Andy Craig, and there were 100 people in her headquarters just about. And I told them, you're gonna see 100 people next week. Each one of them. And that's a lot of people. 100 people saying 100 people. That's a lot of people. You're gonna do the same and maybe even more. And you are all opinion leaders. You're all perceived to be correctly as more knowledgeable than most about the politics of your state and your country. I personally think our country's in trouble. I have 3 children, I have 3 grandchildren, and I have 4 great-grandchildren. And I'm very worried about the country that they're going to inherit. And I feel, as Dean just said, a personal responsibility. But what I know and what you know is I cannot do it alone. I don't care how powerful I am. And I'm not, I will tell you, the minority whip in the Congress is not very powerful. I told Dean, I think when I was in, this is a wonderful office, isn't it? And
Sure
somebody
is.
has no power. There you are. I represent 750,000 people, and no matter how hard I work, I can't make America different for them alone. When I vote, it's one vote. When Dean and I vote, as we will next year together, we still need 216 other people, Mom, to do the same thing. And Mom, congratulations to you. What a wonderful example and inspiration you must be to produce Dean, and I've talked to your other son, the anesthesiologist. I hope I will not put you all to sleep, as he does. And when you just cut me off when you finish that. You talked to me, he said, now don't speak too long. I mentioned John Kennedy. John Kennedy came to the campus of the University of Maryland, Dean. I was a sophomore, 1959. And he talked about young people getting involved and making a difference. I was in a business major. Next week, I switched to a political science major, decided I was going to go to law school and get into politics. 7 years later, I was elected to the United States Senate, 5 months out of Georgetown Law School. It changed my life. And I want to give you an assignment. This is your homework. I want you to go read, tonight or tomorrow, no later than tomorrow, John Kennedy's inaugural address. And right after you finish that, I want you to read Donald Trump's inaugural address. And I want you to see which path do we want to pursue. And it magnifies the difference, not so much between Democrats and Republicans, but magnifies the difference between those who believe that government can and should be a positive agent of change, and somebody believes negatively that government can only be a bad participant. It, for me, crystallizes the difference. Again, not so much between just Democrats and Republicans. My great uncle was a Republican member of Congress from what they call the Silk Stocking District of New York. His name was Joe Baldwin. He was a Rockefeller Republican. Now, Rockefeller wasn't around at that point in time in the early 40s. I mean, he was around, he was alive, but he wasn't the governor. John Lindsay represented that same district. This is about character and conviction, not about party per se. But I will tell you this. There are too many Republicans in the Congress of the United States who are not standing up to that which they know is wrong. And the only way we're frankly going to change it is to do what the Founding Fathers had in mind. Have a check and a balance in the context of this presidency. So, going back to what I said, and then I'll conclude, I hope each one of you feels a personal responsibility. Dean has stepped up to the plate and is running. But Dean needs each one of you to have the same kind of conviction that when you look at your two daughters or your two sons or your neighbors, and when they look at you and say, what are you going to do? Then you respond, I'm going to do something. And what I want you to do is to make sure that Dean Phillips comes to the Congress of the United States. And he will make a difference. He can change our country. Not alone. Because we are a democracy and we need to work together. But you've just heard somebody who is on fire to make positive change in America and who brings the right kind of values to that effort. So you're in this living room, and this is just not a nice party. This is about our country. This is about my 10 folks that are my daughters and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. They need your help. They don't know you. They don't know they need your help. They need your help. That's why I travel around the country. Jim, you've heard me probably give a little bit of this same kind of speech because it's what I feel as to why I'm here. Frankly, with all due respect, I'm not here for any of you. I am here because I need you to send Dean Phillips to the Congress of the United States so that my children will have a better future, a more positive future, a future filled with more hope that Dean talked about. This is serious business. I've been in office a long time. I was elected to the Maryland State Senate at the age of 27 in 1966. You can now compute how old I am. I've been around a long time. And I still do this. People say, why are you still in Congress? I know few jobs that I get to meet so many great people that make America what it is and all that it can be as this job. I really enjoy it. God's been good to me in terms of health, and I can do it. But I need Dean Phillips. And you're the folks who can help get Dean Phillips to the Congress of the United States. And I want you to go out of here not only with hope, but with conviction that you owe it to your country. Dean is your means. You write a check to Dean Phillips, not to Dean Phillips who doesn't need your check. You're writing it for a better America, a more just America, a more inclusive America, a values-centered America. That's what you're writing that check. Now it says Dean Phillips for Congress. But Dean Phillips is only your means to affect that end. That's why I presume you're in this living room. Now, I'm sure we all like Sharon. She's a wonderful lady. I haven't met her. I've known her for probably 30 minutes now. I'm absolutely enamored with her. That's not why I'm in this living room. And I don't think that's why you're here either. You may have the same feeling as I do regarding Sharon. But you're here because you care about your country. Kennedy said, the energy, the faith, the devotion we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. I believe that then. You read that speech. It's full of that fire. And then you read the negativism of the president incumbent in the White House. I don't know if he's a Republican or a Democrat. I don't think he knows. And frankly, he's been both. But I do know this. I don't know how many of you travel around the world, but they're not seeing that light very bright right now. And that's dangerous. Not just for us, but for all the world. Because we're the leader. Not because we were elected, but because we're the only one that can bring some stability around the world. And that's why we need Dean Phillips with his perspective, his experience, and his convictions in the Congress of the United States. You send him to Congress. America needs him. Thank you.
Let you know why we should be hopeful. First of all, I want to recognize Nori Thomas, who's running
Thanks,
at 33A for Minnesota State
Hi.
Legislature.
Hi.
drive this little truck around, I invite people to have conversations. I don't care what your political perspective is. It doesn't matter to me. I want to talk. And I'll tell you what's the biggest epiphany of my campaign so far is recognizing that with very few exceptions, everybody wants the same outcomes. Everybody wants cleaner air and cleaner water, better public schools, higher quality health care at a lower cost. Everybody wants their tax dollars well used. Everybody wants safer streets and a safer country. Everybody. You know, conversation has probably collapsed in Congress, I think it's fair to say, too much. But it has not collapsed in America. And I'm going to remind people of that every single day. And that's a reason to be hopeful. The other reason is young people. A number of them here, in fact, my wonderful team and yours. Raise your hands. You can't see them, everybody. But after what happened in Parkland, Florida, and what has happened since is the most extraordinary experience of my campaign and perhaps my life, of seeing the mobilization of people, young people, in a thoughtful, engaged, principled fashion, holding a town hall meeting tomorrow that I'll be attending, energized, participating, and there's a legacy of these strange times, and mind you, they are strange. I believe the Trump legacy won't be the one he thinks he's going to leave. It's going to be participation. And he is affording us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to stop running to the corners, rather come together. And we're going to build a bigger tent. Both parties should build a bigger tent. I want to be part of that with the Democratic Party.
Let me
I'm
say
grateful.
something. Those young people, they have changed the tenor of debate in America. Those young people in Parkland. Now, there are a lot of young people around the country who are doing it, but we're energized by those few young people in Parkland. We can do that too. We need to do it.
Thank you for being here.
Good to see you.
Representative Boyer asked me, but I'm here to answer, anybody has, I'd love to answer questions. I didn't go into detail about policy or anything you guys, I didn't have a lot of time to cover campaign finance reform, which is my primary personal mandate. And Meg's right, you, first of all, as a candidate, I've got to raise about $5 to $6 million. And this will be a $25 million race, probably between the two sides. Only half of that will be raised by the candidates. The other half, you know, it just. Yeah, well, or just to either get, just so that people can hear and engage. It would be nice. That's what the.
Questions now. I don't know.
So, a $25 million race. Oh, thank you. And only half of that's from the candidates. Half of that will come from what we call IEs, Independent Expenditure Committees, which means that half of the money spent to influence the selection will come from not just outside of the district, but outside of the state, from special interests around the country that simply want to influence our vote. And it disenfranchises, in my estimation, the entire district. So, 3 hours a day typically I have to spend dialing for dollars, because that's what you have to do. But I'm a little different than most candidates. I'm not taking money from any PACs, political action committees, no special interests, no federal lobbyists, and not even member committees, meaning that Steny or Nancy Pelosi or any number of the other members of Congress who send me checks without even asking, send checks without even knowing who I am. I turn them down because I won't take money from any entity that expects something in return, and I won't take any money from anybody who cannot vote. And I think that should be a very fundamental principle in our Congress. The fact of the matter is there are only 6 members of Congress out of 535 who refuse the dollars that I'm refusing. And if that isn't the root of the problem, I don't know what it is. And it's 2 reasons, everybody. It's the extraordinary sums of money that industries and interests spend to influence votes. And it is the time, because when you spend your time raising that money from those institutions that are very wealthy, candidates and electeds don't spend time with middle America, you know, with the massive tens of millions of people who feel unheard, uncared for, unattended to, and disenfranchised.
Well, they only
And when
feel
someone
that
comes
way
along,
because they are.
and they are, because I'm arguing because of the money. That's what Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are connected by a thread, and the thread was that this is all rigged against you, and I'm going to listen to you. And Bernie Sanders did the same thing. I've talked to a lot of Trump supporters who originally were Bernie Sanders supporters for that reason. And that's why he resonated with so many people. So I believe that's where we have to start the change. Not much is going to change, everybody, if we don't reduce the influence of affluence. And even for the affluent, it is in our best interest, because the biggest risk to democracy is not Donald Trump, it's money. It really is. And I'm telling you now from personal experience, it has got to change, because we have a corrupted Congress, and we've legalized it. And now, and then turn the question to Susan. Susan asked, why are there so few, members, at least right now in the Republican Party, who are just speaking out against Donald Trump? And the reason is very simple.
They're afraid.
The reason is very simple. In this very district, the same poll that showed me beating Paulson by 3 points, 46 to 43, also shows 41% support for Donald Trump. So if you want to be a perpetual incumbent, as Eric Paulson does, his calculus is pretty simple. If I speak out against Donald Trump, I am going to disenfranchise essentially my whole base, 41% of the district. And that is true in every single district in this country. So I believe there's a reason why the only members of the Republican Party right now who are speaking out against Trump are the ones who have announced their retirements.
Yeah.
And it's true. This is not innuendo or hearsay. This is true. So is it courage, or is it simply the recognition of I don't have any need anymore? But I'm not saying that this wouldn't be the truth in the Democratic Party, because our problem is perpetual incumbency. And we have too many people who will do anything to preserve their jobs. And the money required to do so requires that you attend to the big institutions. And it is wrong, it's broken, it has got to change. And I want to be a part of a generation that does.
Well, if you're one of how many people that doesn't take PAC money?
Six
Out
of 535.
Right, and these 535 aren't gonna vote for change.
No, of course, it's
Well, so
against their best
how does
interest.
how do you get to that place?
Look, I might start as a single voice, but it can become a chorus. But it starts with all of you, everybody. I mean, let's elevate the issue, let's expose it. There are going to be I've spent my whole life trying to build brands, be the David among Goliaths. Take a small idea and try to make it big. That's what I've tried to do. I'm going to try to do it with this. This is the product. Campaign finance reform is the product. It's got to be packaged, messaged, distributed, and influenced, and we will. But people first have to understand what a darn problem it is, everybody, and it is a massive, massive problem. There's also an engagement issue. I'm less disappointed in people who voted for Donald Trump and more disappointed in people who did not vote at all in the last election. Almost half of this country, everybody, almost half. So I propose that we have a national voting holiday. I think we should have a federal holiday set aside for our voting day, so that nobody feels that they have to take a day off work and they might get their pay docked, so that we can take our family, our children, our grandchildren to the polls and express to them why civic engagement is so important. I want to see the day when, if you contribute to a campaign, it can only be for a candidate for whom you can vote. Because to me, the essence of democracy is representation, and how have we perpetuated a system that sends hundreds, billions every election now, all around the country to influence elections. The candidate should be influencing the voters. The money should not be influencing the voters. And it can change. And I've got a lot of propositions to do so. And I just ask that if you do anything tonight, in addition to what Steny asked you to do, read John Kennedy's inauguration address, go to opensecrets.org, opensecrets.org. Just peruse it. Type in Eric Paulson's name and look at where all his money comes from. You will be astounded. I'm outraising him from individuals, people who can vote, by almost 50%. Almost all of his support comes from institutionalized contributors to campaigns that have high expectations. Pharma, insurance, of course, medical devices, you name it. And I'm not opposed to them at all. But I'm not going to let them influence my votes. The people who send me to Washington should influence those votes. But look at Open Secrets and you will be shocked. Pharmaceutical industry, $250 million in lobbying alone last year. That's 3 lobbies for every single member of Congress. $30-some million enriching campaign coffers. And we wonder why Congress will not mandate that Medicare negotiates pharmaceutical pricing. You wonder why? Because when you're spending $250 million a year to prevent change, it works. But we got to withdraw this influence of the affluence. So that's my primary concern, and I hope you join me in this effort. It's going to be important. Yes.
I have a couple of questions without revealing anything.
I'm not going to give you your belt back. I will tell you this. I came here, I had to change from jeans because Steny was here, and I drove my truck, and I got here and I thought, oh no, I have no belt. So here's the belt out here. I would have forgotten.
Yeah, I didn't give you
Now
the
I feel
shirt
like
off my
something's
back,
missing.
but I
No,
gave you the
the
belt
belt
off
off
my
my
back.
back. The belt off my back.
I will give you the shirt off my back. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Keep your pants
Okay, yes.
up.
Bill.
Yeah, I have two questions. What your national polling reveals about the gun violence issue and the income inequality issue, and how what polling reveals and how those issues it causes may be framed effectively?
Yes,
in the
thank you.
campaign? Yeah.
So starting with gun violence, I made I referenced this in my remarks earlier, but it's very true. Something has changed since the tragedy in Florida, and I think we all agree. And if not just young people, but if this country now doesn't forego it in favor of the next news cycle, I believe change is going to be effective because for the first time in a generation, there's actually agreement. So you asked the question. First, I think we should frame this as gun violence prevention. I'm focused on what the outcomes that we all agree on. And then we can talk about tactics. But the problem with the two parties right now is they dwell on tactics that prevent us even from talking about the outcome. The thing that everybody agrees on, gun owners, passionate Second Amendment defenders, agree that we need to reduce gun violence. The question is, how do we do so? So if we frame it that way, we can have a conversation. My proposition is universal background checks and closing the gun show loopholes. 90+% of the country, Democrats and Republicans, gun owners and non-gun owners, support this. It is just fundamental. And some of you might know, 14-year-olds in this state, in Minnesota, 14-year-olds can buy long guns in private transactions outside of municipal areas, as many as they want, at any time they want. 14-year-olds. Can't drive a car till you're 16. Can't vote till you're 18, and can't have a beer till you're 21. But you can buy a shotgun when you're 14. And look, I support the Second Amendment. It's constitutional. I own a gun myself. But my goodness, it's nonsensical. So that's one. I do believe, we ban hand grenades, we ban bazookas, and we ban automatic weapons from our streets, and nobody complains about it. It's constitutional. Why shouldn't we ban any weapon that can cause mass human carnage in a matter of seconds? That should be the determinant. Whether you call it an assault weapon ban or a semi-automatic weapon ban. How about the classification of anything? An explosive device or a weapon that can cause mass human carnage. That should be relegated to the military alone, I believe. That is not taking away people's guns, it's being just sensible. That's more the Democratic thinking. So the bridge is to the human element here. And with few exceptions, we have a problem with young men in this country. Violent young men. And I would argue that we do have to look at what is the root cause of the violence, not just gun violence, violence generally. I think we should have mental health professionals in every single school in this country, not just to prevent gun violence, because it's the human thing to do, to take care of kids. We should have anti-bullying programs in every single school in this country, because it's a massive problem. And it exists and it's real, and we should do so. We should not, some of you might know in the omnibus bill that was just passed, it actually does clarify that the CDC can now investigate gun violence. But it does not mandate that they do so, and it does not afford 1 penny to do so. Okay? This is how the NRA operates. A little tiny scrap to say, look, we gave you something, right? It's BS. And the truth is we should force the CDC to investigate it and ask them to come up with solutions in a nonpartisan fashion that we can consider. But I will also then close with the campaign finance reform, everybody. The gun lobby, it's not just the money's important, but they are the best organized lobby in Congress. And if you want to read something that is really insightful, a former member of the, I think, Missouri legislature, his last name is Dan, D-A-N-N. He just wrote an op-ed piece in the St. Louis newspaper, I think it was, that articulated how the NRA owned him as a member of his state legislature. Owned him. And it is real. And it is not just the NRA, everybody. It is the massive lobbying organizations in this country that essentially have these people in their pockets. So until we affect these changes, I don't think a whole lot's going to get done. That's why I'm hopeful about young people right now and Moms Demand Action. Gifford's organization just endorsed me because if they're relentless, it's going to change. And if it doesn't change in the next few years, we've got millions of 18-year-olds who are about to vote for the first time, and big change is going to come. The second part of your question, quick, was...
Oh, the income inequality.
Income inequality. Just quickly, my great-grandfather used to say, Dean, money is like manure. If you stack it up, it stinks, and if you spread it out, it fertilizes. And there's a truth to it. The question, of course, is, what role does government play in trying to mandate that? I don't believe it's government's responsibility to do so mechanically. I do think thoughtful government policy provides incentives to share more and to ensure that people are afforded livable wages through the minimum wage. But it also means providing health care to people and paid family leave and ensuring that people have affordable housing available to them. That's how we can do better by people. And there are countries around the world that are doing it better than we do. that are wonderfully prosperous. And I think at least we should learn some lessons from those and consider all ideas. There are some great Republican ideas and great Democratic ideas, but we are not going to do better collectively unless more people in this country do, and I think that's fair to say. So those are my thoughts on the subject. Yes, and then we go to that side.
Dean, what are your thoughts on the national debt?
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, one of the most confounding parts of this tax bill, in my estimation, was the core violation of Republican fiscal discipline that I honor. And I think that the national debt is out of control. Anybody who lived through the 1980s, and just about everybody in this room did, knows that if we get an interest rate spike, things change dramatically. And a lot of our national budget will be consumed by the debt, interest on that debt. And I realize, I don't know what the number is now, I think it's about $300,000 in debt per person in this country. A lot of it owned by foreign interests. And I believe there's no one in Congress that has a magic wand that can actually create a balanced budget, I think it's fair to say. But we should take some steps to return to balanced budgets, pay down the debt, and not burden our children with greater and greater craziness. To use a national credit card to accrue extraordinary benefits to the wealthiest in this country, and in relative terms, very, very, very small benefits to middle-income Americans, in my estimation, is just a woeful dereliction of duty to everybody in this country. And I will tell you all, I did favor the corporate tax rate reduction because I think that is important to keep jobs and businesses here. But the debt is a massive problem, and I'm saddened by the fact that the Republican Party has seemingly disavowed fiscal discipline, because that is actually what we really need right now. And then Meg, I'm going to, just because other people have questions.
Yeah, I want to go back to your campaign finance issue and call your attention to a national organization, AmericanPromise.net.
Okay.
They are committed to passing a 28th amendment that will, in effect, overturn Citizens United. There have been 19 states in the country so far whose legislatures have signed on, and there is a Minnesota chapter, and we are having a meeting tomorrow at 1 o'clock over near the St. Paul Planned Parenthood building. You can go on AmericanPromise.net. There is a pledge on the website for all candidates to take. There are various other actions that can be taken by independent citizens. And last month, one of the national founders of the organization was here speaking, and he said just what you're saying. He said, you want to know why people, the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress, no longer are able to work together and compromise and come up, with solutions to some of our most basic problems? He said, because as soon as someone says, yeah, I'd like to really work with you on that, let's find a common ground meeting point, immediately the funders will go in and say, you compromise, we're done, we're not funding you. So that is why, according to this man, you don't see the compromises that used to happen. People aren't going to meet in the middle anymore. So again, AmericanPromise.net, it's something I think we should all know about, and you can't take the candidate or the congressman pledge yet, but yet.
Not yet. Yes, operative word. Yeah. And by the way, Citizens United was a decision that really did wreak havoc in our campaign finance system. It is why now we have half the expenditures, over half, from outside interests that spend extraordinary amounts of money and create negative advertising. But I would say to offer an amendment that could actually pass to overturn.
It's a long
shot. I mean, we haven't even, the Equal Rights Amendment, my goodness, is 50 years old.
But it's still getting the word out there.
It's getting the word out.
It's drumming up support.
And there are some things we can do in the short
Yes.
term. One is transparency. Even, you might have seen today, Facebook finally announced that any political ad that is purchased on Facebook has got to be qualified, because the Russian influence is real, everybody. But it's not, they weren't supporting Donald Trump. This is really important. It is not a one party over the other party mandate. They want to create divisions in this country and turn ourselves against one another, and it's working. So campaign finance is actually a much bigger umbrella. Transparency is one. Right now, each of you can give $5,400 to my campaign, which I trust you will before the time you leave tonight. And it's capped. But this is very important. It's capped. $5,400 is a lot of money. Most people can't afford that, and even those that can, most won't do it. But I'm troubled by the fact that our courts have determined that we cannot cap expenditures. Because in my estimation, that would be the best, easiest fix to this problem, is if we had more modest expenditures in campaigns. Our friends in Canada capped races for parliament, MP races, at about $180,000 Canadian between the two sides. And this will be about a $25 million race repeated every 2 years. You get to Congress and you gotta start raising the money for the next time. We can do it, and if you reduce the amount that you can spend, it forces candidates to go out and do the hard work. Not what Eric Paulson does, which is avoid town halls, avoid public forums, and spend millions of dollars misportraying himself on television. I mean, that's how this system works, everybody. You put your best face forward on television and hope people don't really notice. Let's force people to get out and talk to people. Not just beautiful living rooms like this one, but farms and apartment buildings and retirement communities and where people are avoided. Those are the people we should be meeting with, and we should provide incentives to do so. And we can. Yes?
Well, Dean, our friend, our Rolnick, is not so concerned about the inequality as he is about equal opportunity. So your issue about getting good public schools for everyone and the likes is right on.
Thank you. And Art Rolnick, everybody, who worked at the Federal Reserve, he issued, I think, the most important research that I wish was acted on more, which is how quantifying how early childhood education and investments in early childhood would result in extraordinary savings to our country and ourselves over the long term. And we should be pursuing that because it's data-driven decisions. And I'm again so troubled by the fact that we can't seem to act on what is so clearly, effective policy that frankly both parties agree on. And that's a perfect example. And it is opportunity for all. Yeah.
Dean, I have a question about inclusion, specifically how we can make Minnesota a place where young people, more specifically young people of color, want to come to work. So I'm a transplant from Los Angeles. I came to Carleton College.
You're out of your mind.
I ask myself that every winter. But I've seen this trend of people here. They grow up together. They go to high school together. They go to the U. They graduate. They all move with their bros to uptown. They spend 4 years in uptown, move downtown to work, get married, move out to the suburbs, western suburbs. Yeah. And it's a really hard place to break into. Right. It's a hard place if you're not from here. You're not from here. Mm-hmm. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that, because I think that for Minnesota to become a place of inclusion, that's a problem we need to solve.
Thanks for bringing it up. My principles, as I shared earlier, my principles dictate that I celebrate differences first and foremost, and it's what makes not just a community a vital place to live, but it's what really makes this country great. It's what makes this country great. Minnesota's interesting. I hear this from people of color. I hear it also from Caucasians who move here. That this is particularly a hard place to break into. And I think part of it is actually what I expressed earlier. I love it here, and I stayed here. And a lot of people live in Minnesota have those social networks already built in and aren't looking to expand them. We don't have a lot of expats. So I can only imagine what that feels like. On a broader scale, I wish, we can't legislate inclusion. We can't legislate compassion. We can't legislate love and decency. And I wish we could sometimes. But we can sure as heck do a better job. And by the way, this is where public education comes in. Desegregating schools, so that at young ages, kids grow up with people who don't necessarily look like them, or pray like them, or eat like them, or think like them, or have the same abilities. That's how we create, I think, an inclusive culture. And that's how the change begins. And I think it is possible, but you can't wave a magic wand. We have to create a new generation, frankly, by creating inclusion at younger ages, in my estimation. I'd love your perspective. Are there some things, do you think there are some things that, as a member of Congress, or even in the private sector, that we can do?
I ask myself this question every day. Why am I in Minnesota? And I was speaking with this woman over here. I went to college with their son, Preston. And Preston's grew up somewhere in the western suburbs, wants to be a fly fisherman in the future. And when I got to Minnesota, I didn't have white friends. Yeah. I grew up in a very Chinese suburb of Orange County, California. And by the end of my senior year, I was living with 5 large bearded football and rugby players. And it was, coming to Minnesota was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Wow. And I asked myself, how do we bridge the cultures? How do we bridge that gap and make it so that you know, both sides, because it's a two-way street,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
You know, you can't expect to include other people if, you know, they don't include you as well.
Indeed.
And, you know, I don't have an answer for you, but I hope we
I
can
think
figure it
if
out.
you
Thank you.
just keep making it more capable.
And Philip, you're still here. You're still here after your years of graduating for Carleton. So something's holding you in Minnesota.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not the weather.
Yeah, it's not the weather. That's right.
And, you know, one thing I want to also just I'm so proud of my team. I want you to know what an extraordinary experience this has been for me, because I believe a lot of times people ask me questions in rooms like this about police brutality and how we can try to, you know, how we can rectify some of the ills that are unfortunately part of a lot of our communities. And one of my responses is, of course, leadership and training, and most important is ensuring that police forces and educational forces, if you will, reflect the diversity of the communities that they serve, so that we have some cultural understanding. And to that end, the 3rd District, you would think, is pretty darn white, of course. But the truth of the matter is we have an extraordinarily fast-growing Somali population in Eden Prairie. We have an extraordinary Liberian community up in the northern part of the district. We're changing. And to that end, we have a campaign team that's a remarkable mix of people from different life experiences and religions and backgrounds. Oswar, our digital engagement coordinator, born in Bangladesh, ran for mayor of Minneapolis at the age of 22. I saw his extraordinary campaign truck outside of my office one day, and I thought, if he doesn't win the mayoral race, I want him on my team. And he's on my team. Dekati Sawyer, who is a Liberian national, who lost her husband to Ebola, if you can imagine, some years ago, is on our team, representing, you know, her community. It has been the most joyful, extraordinary family of people with whom I've ever worked, and I've had some great blessings over the years. And even in my personal experience, that has changed me, and I'm trying to encourage others to do the same. And then we have Grace, who represents our Caucasian. We got female and Caucasian. And Massachusetts. Yeah, East Coast. So, but that's again, one vote can't change what we're talking about, you know, but each of us can do small things every day that ultimately change a culture.
Thank you.
Yes, Sharon.
Dean, I just leveraging off what Philip's question, because I've lived here for 17 years, and I'm also, you know, from Asia, also a transplant, but I was fortunate that I, you know, was able to get into the community a lot faster than a lot of other folks. But, you know, you mentioned, you know, the district, there's Brooklyn Park, there's Plymouth, there's a lot of, you know, our folks in this area are very different demographic. The needs, the interests, what keeps them awake at night is very different from someone in Brooklyn Park.
It sure is.
How, as you go out and you're talking to different folks, what are you seeing and what are you hearing that, you know, that's really different? And as you think about what you need to be doing, what, you know, how does that help you decide what is priority for you and what you need to be doing for your constituents?
You know, there are some things that are very unique to different communities, and there's some things that are universal. You know, I'll tell you though, I talk to way too many people who are one illness away from bankruptcy, way too many people who can barely afford their current insurance, their health insurance, barely afford it, which is only going to go up, I'm afraid, with the elimination of the individual mandate in the recent tax bill. You know, that means young, healthy people probably going to be, you know, buying, you know, ceasing to buy insurance, which means all of the rest of us will have to pay a little bit more. There are a lot of people who literally live in fear every day that they might be taken away and sent, you know, back to the countries from which they came, including children, and that's true more than you all might imagine. And it's a real human issue when young kids are afraid every day when they come to school that they might go home and have a parent or a guardian who's been deported, and it's real. You know, Donald Trump is on everybody's mind. And when I read the 41% number, it's fascinating because, of course, in most of the circles in which I run or walk, that's not the case. But having those conversations, I will tell you this, it's really important, because if you are willing to sit down and talk to somebody and let them be heard and then ask them to allow you to be heard, you can make a lot of progress. But, you know, Donald Trump is on people's mind. You know, we all recognize that, God forbid, we face an international crisis of any magnitude, and we are increasingly, he is surrounding himself with people who are equally, if not more concerning than he is ways. The third district is somewhat unique. It's the most affluent in the state, most educated by far. In fact, one of the most affluent and educated in the entire country. This tax bill, and no matter what anybody might tell you, this tax bill was designed to punish blue states like Minnesota and reward red states, and that's the truth. Because the elimination of the SALT deduction in a state like Minnesota is a big deal. And that's true of people of great means and people of actually relative modest means. But anybody who owns a home or who earns an income, who lives in the third district, in most cases, are going to be losers in this deal. There's a reason that 12 of Eric Paulson's Republican colleagues in the House of Representatives voted against this bill. Each one of them from very similarly high tax states like ours, New Jersey, New York, and California, because this bill negatively impacts them. And the people with whom I'm talking have either noticed barely any change in their paychecks, or and I say this, a Democrat who right now refers to this whole tax bill as only crumbs for the middle class, is put on film, and they're going to do ads in November saying how ridiculous it is to make such statements. But I'm hearing this from the people who are getting small jumps in their paychecks, not nearly enough to make a difference, and now their health insurance premiums are going up. It's going to, and the costs are just going to continue to go up. And I know people of much more significant means who are seeing tax bills, that are talking to their accountants right now, who are seeing tax bills skyrocket. I know a friend who lives in the third district who literally put his house up for sale and moved already to Austin, Texas. And furthermore, we rank 44th on the list of American states in the differential between what we send to Washington, D.C. in federal tax dollars compared to what we get back in federal programs and investment. 44th.
Right.
And that number's only going to get worse. And I believe we need a delegation of Democrats and Republicans who advocate for Minnesota, for God's sakes, because we do take care of people better. We do pay more taxes, and we do have a better place to live. And instead of being punished for it, we should be rewarded for it. And this notion that somehow Alabama and Mississippi are subsidizing us, it's nonsensical, everybody. Every one of you send tax dollars to Washington that are used in states that don't take care of people.
That's right.
We're not just taking care of our own or trying to, we're taking care of the rest of this country, and this bill makes it that much harder. And lastly, this bill is going to reduce charitable giving in Minnesota, which is a hallmark.
Yeah.
It's a hallmark of what differentiates us from other states. And it's a travesty. And Eric Paulson, who didn't just vote yes on this bill, he helped write it. And rest assured, I do intend to beat him this November, everybody, I do. Rest assured, whether he retires in advance, whether I beat him, or whether he retires maybe in the next cycle, rest assured, he will probably take a job as a lobbyist for one of the industries that benefited immensely from this tax bill, because that is how Congress works right now, everybody.
Yeah.
That's how it works. I'm going to close this part by saying there are some things in the tax bill that I think are good. I think reducing the corporate tax rate to more competitive levels is a good thing. I think the creation of opportunity zones to encourage investment in the most underserved communities in this country is actually a good thing. There are some parts of this that are actually not terrible, but it didn't do what we needed it to do, which is to afford more to more people, so that people come into my coffee shop and buy a few more cups of coffee a month, or go to Valley Fair a couple more times in the summer. That's how we could do better, and we should have, and we still can. But boy, in the meantime, a terrible, terrible bill at the worst possible time, with the economy booming, things swimming along, and now this, and it's deeply, deeply troublesome. A couple more questions, and then yes.
So I was one of the bearded white guys that Phil mentioned earlier. We went to college together.
What happened to the beard?
I just got the sticker. So two things. I wish you would have worn jeans. I would have been the only person in jeans.
Yes, believe me, my belt's with my jeans. I would have wanted to.
I am quite comfortable though. So my question is, do you have any thoughts on national student loan debt?
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I spent almost $250,000 on education. I'm going to be paying off loans till I'm 30. So you're talking about in between jobs, I have the choice to pay health insurance, or I have to, I have to pay my loans off. So I'm just curious to see what sort of thoughts and conversations you've had. Ideas.
Thanks for bringing it up. And of course, I talk with people every day. I talk about another issue that I hear every single day, both from parents and students. How the heck am I going to afford this, and how can I possibly graduate with massive amounts of debt? Two issues. I can't say I've got a lot of ways I can help you right now, but I do know a lot of ways that we can do better moving forward. But starting with what you're talking about, we should treat student loan debt the same way we do consumer debt. should be able to be discharged in the case of bankruptcy, and we should apply interest rates to it that are competitive. What are you paying do you know what you're paying right now? 7-8%?
It is, I renegotiated it down, refinanced, so down to like 5%. So
Okay, well, this is
it's not,
darn
it's not
good.
terrible, but it
That's-
was up 6-7% for each
Okay,
people.
7%. Everybody in this room knows that the cost of money is a lot lower than that. We should be applying the lowest interest rates to that debt because it's the most important, you know? And both parties, Republican Party and Democratic Party, should be providing incentives and reward people who have aspirations and interests to further their education. Why this country doesn't invest in early childhood education and doesn't make sure that everybody who wants to go to college or pursue any path of career can do so without being burdened. It is nonsensical. With all that said, I do believe moving forward we should watch states like New York. Thankfully in a democratic republic we have states that test new ideas. Governor Cuomo just signed legislation that's going to afford 2- and 4-year SUNYs, University of New York educations, to any student that comes from a New York family that earns less than $125,000 a year. Free education. That's how we should do things. And if it works, we should replicate that around the country. With all that said, Pell Grants. Pell Grants have not come close to keeping pace with inflation. We have to ensure that we can do so. And lastly, I'm really troubled by the fact that we have private schools in this country that are aggregating tens of billions of dollars incrementally every year with endowments that are literally approaching $100 billion in some cases. Right now the requirement is that only 5% of that corpus has to be used. 5%. And I would argue if you are a university that has a $75 billion endowment, perhaps there's enough money there to afford education to people who otherwise can't pay for it, so they don't have to leave with debt. Why don't we look at that the same way? And then at public universities, the cost of education has skyrocketed well beyond the cost of general consumer inflation. So yes, we can do better. And I do not one reason I'm running for Congress, everybody, is I simply don't understand what seems to be so self-apparent that we can't do better, and I think it's simply a matter of a lot of new voices. So thanks for bringing it up, and I wish I could tell you there's a plan out there that would just take care of it, but I unfortunately don't.
I have a.
Anybody, any other first time questions before? Okay, Mike?
Well, when you were talking about the national debt, I read a couple years ago in the Wall Street Journal an editorial about why we will never be going to war with China. If China wants something from us and we won't give it, they'll just repossess, they'll call all the loans. We can't pay them.
I'm not as worried about that, to be forward. I think that's a scare tactic. I mean, our debt is a problem. There's no question.
Yeah.
I think the likelihood of somehow China calling it doesn't quite work that way.
That's
But what's a
true.
bigger concern is right now, what's a real concern is this war, literally a trade war that is a brewing. And my goodness, it has consequences beyond what any of us could possibly recognize, because the man on this side who is in charge has no strategy, has no understanding of international trade, and sees such things as binary. Either you win or you lose. And until we have you need someone in the White House who sees win-wins, for God's sakes. And this is deeply, deeply troublesome, everybody. And in the 3rd District, my goodness, Cargill, perfect example. We have farms in the 3rd District. Minnesota, a quarter of the entire Minnesota soybean crop, billions of dollars, is exported to China every year. 25% of it. These farmers can't take it. They can't be subject to losing their entire crops because of this kind of nonsense. And that's what's going to happen.
So what does Eric Paulson say about that?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Look at everybody. I wish, and I don't want to disparage his character, but I can only disparage his votes and his lack of courage to speak truth to anything. And I have not heard him utter a word of dissent against Donald Trump. Period.
Is there any movement to have?
And I don't understand. I really don't understand. The only calculus I can understand is he believes if he says one thing negative about the President of the United States, that he will lose this election. Plain and simple. That he's basing it all on that. Because, well, I don't want to go out too far on that but that's why I'm running for Congress, everybody.
What is the chances of a debate between you two?
Well,
It'd be great.
Well, here's the irony. He usually agrees to one debate at the Chamber of Commerce, which is favorable for him. Now this time his adversary will be someone who's actually been a member of a Chamber of Commerce. So it might be helpful. Look at his MO is to hide everyone, and it's just because it's worked for him. It's worked really well for him to not have debates, not have town halls. Has anybody received his robocalls at the last minute for a town hall? Right? That, in my estimation, that is a dereliction of duty. Unpublicized, random, last minute telephone calls that you can't even ask a question. And unless you're lucky enough to have one that is, benign enough for him to entertain. I don't understand it. And it's deeply troublesome, and it's not unique to him.
Get Gary Eichten and have a debate.
He'll have to debate. He'll have to.
I would like to go back quickly to your point earlier about how the percentage of people who did not vote in the last election. And what are you doing to make sure that we have maximum voter registration and voting in the 3rd district coming up?
I'm so glad you bring it up. The good news is this: in the 3rd district, we are one of the highest turnout districts in the entire country. Unfortunately, when we have midterms, it drops precipitously.
But there are pockets of people who traditionally either don't vote for either they're intimidated or so how can we help with that?
So first of all, each and every one of you can spread the word. Remind people that you can vote early. You can vote absentee without any. It's easy now in Minnesota. Most people don't even know that you can vote early and absentee without any reason anymore. We have an entire engagement team in the north and the south, or north and central and southern part of our district who every day are spending time engaging people and letting people know how to register to vote and encouraging them to do so. I'm very, very optimistic because of young people. There are we have an interesting district. There are a lot of 18-year-olds, a lot of first-time voters, and then there's a precipitous drop from age 19 back to the late 30s because, of course, high schoolers graduate, vote for the first time, graduate, move out, go to college, or move out of to the city, and there's a dearth of people in that middle. And then, of course, as we get older, and that's why we have high turnout, is because older demographics tend to vote more. But we have made it easier. It's just a lot of people don't know that. So we're dedicating a lot of our resources to engaging people, reminding them how to do so, and encouraging them, of course, on the day of. I mean, shoot, I'll drive people to the polls that day. I probably will, literally. I've driven people to some of my own town halls already who otherwise couldn't get there. And those are some of the funnest conversations I've had. But we have to encourage people. Our district's pretty well positioned. The sad truth is younger people have chosen not to vote in recent elections. And I really do believe that's going to change in a big, big way. And remember, everybody, 50,000 people who would have showed up otherwise in the last election would have had an entirely different effect on the outcome of the 2016 presidential race. 50,000 people. It makes a big difference. Yes.
On a cheerful note, pointed out that in the last election, Terry Bonhoeff actually received more votes than Eric Paulson had at the last midterm election.
Yeah.
So it's not inconceivable that with a strong turnout and a strong candidate that we could change the representation in the House substantially.
Sure. In fact, Terry Bonhoeff, it's an interesting. It's hard to look back now, but remember, there are not many people in this room or in the 3rd district that thought Donald Trump was going to win, and that's why a lot of people voted for Hillary Clinton and Eric Paulson because he's a check. This district is engaged and likes the check and balance on the executive branch. He won by 14 points. I mean, slaughtered it. But now it's not only is it the reverse, but it's reversed in a really serious way. So I'd like to think that this district, that does like a check and balance on the executive branch, will do just the opposite this time. In this case, send a Democrat to at least someone, or a Republican for that matter, someone who will speak truth to power and provide that check. The United States House of Representatives, as many of you might know, has a distinct responsibility specifically to be that check on the executive branch. And it's a darn important task. So turnout is important, but the winds of change are clearly blowing in the left direction. But I don't want to win this race just because I'm a Democrat. I want to win this race because of my principles and values that I'll bring to Washington, representing everybody in the district instead of someone who just represents half of the district. And if I do my job, and I ask you to help me do it by trying to advocate on my behalf, we'll do it. I don't want to just win. I want to win in a landslide and show the rest of the country that with the right approach and the right engagement and the desire to have conversations, we can change the tenor and tone of politics. And that'll be the case. But My adversary has a lot of money.
You know, I'm just curious, and I'm going to fast forward to after November when you have won and you're in the House. And, you know, having spent a couple of years on Capitol Hill and working in Congress, and I think I have some idea of how it works. How do you see yourself going against the mechanism of the whole party? Because there is an element of moving where the party moves and voting party lines. So how do you have you thought beyond?
I have. No, I'll tell you. I articulate 3 words in most of my materials. One is responsible, one is inclusive, and the other is independent. And independent isn't just independent-minded. It's also relative to my own party. And I want to tell you all this. This is really important for those of you who are Democrats in the room. You know, there are a lot of left-wing Democrats who vilify me just because I'm someone who's been in business. You know, I mean, I've been subject. It's a bit. I mean, I should say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I've been subject to stereotyping that I haven't been subject to probably my entire life, and it's changed me. And I recognize the deep-seated, very troublesome elements of a lot of people. And I'm running for Congress as much to bring some sensibility to a Democratic Party that I believe needs a little bit more, as I am to bring sensibility to Washington that clearly needs a little bit more. The reason I don't take money from any of the interests that I shared with you, and the reason I've sent back 5 checks from sitting members of Congress who send me them out of the blue, oftentimes with not even a note attached, just because I'm a Democrat and I'm running against Eric Paulson, I send their $1,000 checks back. And I say, thank you, but I'll take $1,000 of your advocacy, but I don't want to be in a position where I owe them anything. And that means votes, because that is the way it works. I mean, Steny Hoyer came to Minnesota and Wisconsin to help support candidates like me. You know, he might want to run for Speaker of the House if Democrats take back the House. You know, he, like many members of Congress, do this for reasons that I'm sure you can imagine. And I recognize that. But I won't take money from even him because I don't want to be in a position where I owe him something. And I think we need more people in both parties that act like that. But it starts with that. You know, it's not them, it's us. Government is us, everybody. And we have to start sending people there that are willing to do these things in a principled manner. These are kindergarten lessons. And yet Congress seems to be a reflection of the worst lessons. So I don't get it, but I do believe the money is the driver. And we can start change. And I make this promise to you, everybody. You know, Congress is supposed to be a giant caucus, but now they divide into smaller caucuses because they don't even talk. You know, leadership of both parties are culpable. Leadership of both parties prevent really important legislation from even reaching the floor because if the other party proposes it, the other party has to object to it. I want to be amongst that small group in Washington at some point that calls for independent thinking and disavows party responsibility. And I don't care what office I get, I don't care about my committee assignments. I care about the much bigger pictures. And I probably won't get a nice office if I win. I probably won't get good committee assignments. And that's fine. But we need more people willing to do the same. Last One more. And then I'm just going to make some closing remarks and we'll get out. Bill.
Despite Al Franken's difficult departure from the Senate, would you welcome his support? And what about Amy Klobuchar and Tina Smith both being on the ballot at the same time you are?
You know, Al Franken, I believe he should have been afforded due process. I mean, that's how this country works. It troubles me when events like that occur and you're not afforded process. That said, no, I'm not seeking nor accepting support. In fact, the first thing the Republican Party did was a press release. They saw that he had not given me any money, which they would have expected, because they were going to call on me to give it back. But they found that I gave him a check for about $1,000 2 campaigns ago. So they actually asked him to return his check to me. No, I will. Amy Klobuchar is a perfect example, though, of a representative who transcends parties. And she wins in landslide margins in the 3rd district. She really does. Jim Ramstad, Amy Klobuchar, Bill Frenzel, You know, these are the kind of people that really embody what this district begs for. Fiscal responsibility, social inclusion, and decency. I would love the support of Amy Klobuchar in this district, because I believe she represents I wish she would take some more bold stands certain times, but I mean, she represents the principles that I think are important. I know Tina Smith personally and admire her, and I certainly would take her support. There's no question. But that said, I'm not taking money from candidate committees. So if a candidate wants to give me a personal investment into our campaign, by all means, because they can vote. But I will not take it from their committee, because their committee can't vote, and I won't be beholden to that. So I want to say thank you. We're a little bit past 8, but this is what makes this pursuit so wonderful. Your questions, your engagement, we're 7 months to the day on November 6th. And I'm grateful. I'm just a candidate. All of you can make this a campaign. And I would ask that you